under the theme Stumbling Blocks and Stepping Stones to a 50% Renewable Energy Mix by 2023. I am Elizabeth Bennett Marsh, the Acting Director of Consumer and Public Affairs at the OUR, and I'll be your moderator for today. We're live streaming on the OUR's Facebook and YouTube pages. We invite you to tell other persons about it so they also can join in this very important discussion. In 2018, Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, announced that Jamaica would officially increase its target for use of renewable energy to 50%, up from the 30% target by 2030. The Governor General, Sir Patrick Allen, during the delivery of his throne speech on February 14 this year, announced that the national energy policy is to be updated to include guidance for achieving this 2030 vision. So what are the considerations if we are to successfully achieve a 50% renewable energy target by 2030? To weigh in on this, we have an esteemed group of panelists. Val Fagan is the Power Generation Systems Consultant at the OUR. Welcome, Val. Elizabeth Butler is the Legal Advisor for International Clean Energy Projects of Butler Law Offices in the United States. Welcome, Elizabeth. And of course, we have Blaine Jarrett, a Senior Vice President for Energy Delivery at JPS. We also have sign language interpreter Mian Quinlan, who will be ensuring that the hearing impaired are actively engaged on this session. We'll be taking your comments, questions via the chat features, namely the the chat features on Facebook and YouTube. Just put any comments that you have there, and then we'll take them and pose any queries that you have to our panelists after all presentations are made. So without further ado, I now hand over to Val Fagan, Power Generation Systems Consultant at the OUR, to make his presentation on this issue. Val, over to you.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, good day, good afternoon to the audience, wherever you are. We appreciate you taking time out to join us today as we traverse the road to achieving this important milestone in our electricity sector development. I am particularly pleased to be a part of this panel of esteemed industry professionals. I will focus on the ability of this sector to achieve this noble target of 50% renewable. So without further ado, I will get to the presentation, and then at the end of the presentation, we can see whether it is an achievable target. Are you seeing my screen?
We are seeing it, but it's not in slide mode, in slideshow.
Okay, let me get back to the slide mode. Are you seeing it?
Not in slideshow, but just click from beginning at the top. No.
Give me 1 second, please.
Okay. So we're waiting for Val just to get his slideshow set up, which will be very shortly as we wait to hear his views on this very important issue on stumbling blocks and stepping stones to achieving the 2030 renewable energy target of 50%, according to the Prime Minister, and as articulated by the Governor General in his flown speech on February 14, certainly we would have already made some headway into putting a dent into that target. And we are eager to see, what are some of the issues for consideration, certainly from a regulator's point of view. A little later on, if you're just joining us on Facebook and YouTube, we'll be hearing from Elizabeth Butler, who is a specialist on clean energy, formerly of the USAID. And then we'll be getting the JPS perspective as the sole transmitter and distributor of electricity in Jamaica. What are some of the considerations from the electricity provider's point of view? So we're waiting just to hear from Val, just to get his presentation up and running, and to see if you could take us off video for a second, Val, while you get that sorted. And then once it is sorted, then we will get back to you on this. Remember that you can pose any questions and comments that you have in the chat feature of Facebook or YouTube. We really want to hear your thinking or any questions that you may pose to the panel. I don't know when we're going to be able to get them in one setting again, but certainly we are looking forward to definitely hearing from them on this particular issue. What are your thoughts? Have you looked at the National Energy Plan, certainly the Vision 2030 program that the government has had in place for quite a little while, does make reference to the NEP, the National Energy Plan, and we are eager to see whether or not this is achievable from your perspective, from your layperson or from your expert perspective. If you're joining us as a provider of renewable energy resources or thinking about it, what are some of the considerations you think that we need to be having, both from the regulator's point of view, the electricity provider's point of view, as well as the government's point of view? We definitely want to be sure that we are getting all the points of view. So I think, Val, in the interest of moving ahead, I'm just going to run your slides for you, if you don't mind, Val, and then we can take it from there. How is that? Can that happen, Val?
That would be fine.
So Val, I'm going to share. If you could stop sharing, just click stop sharing so I can share yours. All right, so I'm going to be sharing your screen. So can you see the screen, Val?
Yes, I can, Liz.
Okay, so you can now go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you. This is a very important topic, and as Liz indicated, we have been mandated to achieve over 50% or 50% renewable integration into the electricity mix. We will start this assessment of the achievement of this noble target by looking at the mandates, the status of the electric sector, and the imperative for the sector in order to achieve this goal. Next, please. Now, what are the mandates impacting on the sector? The National Energy Policy of 2013 required that 20% of energy from renewables be the standard. For the electricity sector, 30% of electricity should be provided from renewable energy. And there are also pronouncements on several policy imperatives to assist the achievement of these targets and to ensure that we have a modern energy infrastructure, efficient infrastructure, input of significant amount of renewable energy and fuel diversification, which should lead to fuel security. In order to achieve this, we need a proper governance framework and the public sector be a model for energy efficiency. The energy sector, as Liz indicated, has been challenged by the Prime Minister to achieve 50% targets renewable energy integration. In addition, Jamaica is a signatory to the Paris Agreement, which aims to strengthen focus for the achievement of global warming of less than 2% and prior to pre-industrial levels. The next slide, please. Now let us look at the situation in Jamaica's energy sector. In Jamaica, imported fuel is a significant portion of our imports. It consumes 27% of the value of our imports. The major sector consuming energy, fuel, imported fuel, land transport, 33, shipping, aviation, 19.8, and electricity generation. The focus of this discussion, almost 30%, with the bauxite and the other sectors contributing about 16%. Electricity sector energy mix for 1921 consisted of 59.5% LNG, 28% liquid fuel, and 12% renewables. The electric sector, as we know, it is very dependent on fossil fuel for approximately 88% of its energy requirements. Notwithstanding, the electricity sector today is more resilient than it was in 2015, when the mix was 95% liquid fuel and 5% of renewables. Next slide. How did we get to the new milestone of 12.41%? Relatively small, but it is a huge jump from the 6%. We did a number of things, the sector. We introduced natural gas as a transitory fuel. It's a cleaner burning gas with more stable pricing. So we converted some of the modern combustion plants to burn natural gas, moving away from expensive diesel. So we did this for the Bow plant. 58% of wind and solar plants were implemented. In 2018, we further converted a Bow combined cycle to gas. And major projects in 2019 include the 192 megawatt combined cycle on gas, 37 megawatt solar plant. But concurrently, we retired 193 megawatt of HFO plant to ensure that we gradually reduce the inputs of HFO, which is more dirty fuel than liquid natural gas. Next slide, please. So this is an indication of the expected energy mix at 2023 of 13.7% of renewable, moving from 12.41% in 2023. Next. Now, the electricity sector is governed by institutions such as the MSET, Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. MSET is responsible for planning the system and issuing of license and the management of energy programs, very important aspect of the operation. The generation procurement entity, the body, is responsible for the procurement of new generating capacity through competitive tender process. And this body is also charged to establish procurement protocols and rules for new generation. The OUR, the Office of Utilities Regulation, is the regulatory arm of the sector and encompasses tariff, technical standards, services, and advise the minister on the issuance of license. The Electricity Act is the sector's governing legislation, and it provides a framework, the legal framework for the sector. Our key stakeholders include JPS, who is the system operator. JPS has a license to transmit and distribute electricity island-wide. The IPP plays a very important role. Independent power producers produce energy for on-selling to the grid operator. And most importantly, the 680,000 consumers that depends on the supply of electricity. And we also have a fuel supplier, the Petrojam, and other fuel suppliers that play a vital role in keeping the sector going. Just a quick look at the data, trying to set a context for the achievement of the 50% renewable target. JPS has over 1,000 available, 861 megawatt of capacity installed. However, the IPPs control 444 megawatt of this capacity. JPS owns 32 megawatt of renewable capacity, while the IPPs control 180%. The renewable capacity makes up 17% of the target of capacity. We are, heard earlier on, being charged to increase the input of renewable to the system to 50%. This is a challenging target, and to counter the variability of including more renewables to the system, JPS has the foresight and has gone and installed, with the approval of the office, the OUR, 24.5 megawatt of hybrid energy storage systems to counter the variability of renewable energy. Can we move on, please? Now, the journey to 50% renewable really starts here. The initial forecast determines the type and size of capacities, plants, resources to meet the supply, the consumer's requirement for the supply of electricity. You will note that in the middle graph, the generation consumption, electricity consumption had fallen as a result of the COVID experience. And as it stands now, the forecast requires a diminished amount of energy to satisfy the consumer need. And this, in its sense, is perhaps not such a bad thing in that it gives you breathing space in terms of time to implement viable renewable energy solutions. The graph to the right here indicates where we are at. In 2022, we're at 12.5%. Our target for 2030, very ambitious. It's 50%. And to achieve that 50% means that we have to be generating over 2,300 units of energy, gigawatt hours. And for those who are not so familiar with the unit gigawatt hours, it's a million megawatt of kilowatt. It's a million kilowatt hours. Your bill normally is, in terms of consumption, is stated in kilowatt hours. So this is 2,305 million kilowatt hours from renewable by 2030, which is, as you know, is 7 years from today, 2023 to 2030. Let us examine a roadmap to the 50% renewable energy by 2030. This preferred portfolio plan, as we call it in the industry, the plan really defines the timing and the size of resource required to meet the demand of the customer. Not only meet in terms of satisfying the quantity, but in terms of the quality, meaning a reliable, sustainable, and affordable electricity supply. The plan was the product, or is the product, of significant analysis taking into account the existing resource, future resources contemplated and pricing, future pricing levels and other financial parameters. We have concluded that the plan required no fossil fuel plant is included in the plan. Beyond 2030, renewable will become the dominant source of energy, contributing 51.6%, and that would achieve the target of 50% by 2030. In order to counter the variability of the renewable resource and the unpredictable for long period, the plan seeks to require a significant amount of long duration battery energy storage system, which what it does, it prevents electricity from renewable from being dumped, and it also provides electricity whenever there stores electricity to provide whenever there is a shortfall in electricity from renewable energy. So it serves a dual purpose as a supplier and also as a storage. Based on the cost estimate, this investment by 2030 would require $1.2 billion to achieve the implementation goals. Next slide, please. Now, the question is asked, where are we going to get in the first instance, the renewable resource? Do we have that potential? We are very fortunate that MSET, in collaboration with international agencies, had the foresight to carry out several energy feasibility studies over the years. And I have just summarized the results of these studies. As we can see here, we have good renewable potential, especially wind and solar. The quantified value of wind and solar is capable of supplying the required electricity required to meet the 50% renewable energy target by 2030. The potential capacity, if you look in the right column here on total, we have over 3,500 gigawatt hours per year identified. Recall earlier on, we indicated that we would require 2,300 gigawatt hours from renewable source, subtracting what is already there, which is 534 gigawatt hours for the 12.4% of renewable energy. We have a requirement of about 1,800 gigawatt hours from renewable. So the potential identified, and this is just based on those studies. I'm sure other sites are under the radar for further studies. So it could get more. So I think at this stage, we are in a good position to achieve that. Now, in order to achieve the targets, meaning to implement this on a rapid basis, the quantity of renewable energy resources required, we need to have a supporting renewable energy policy environment. Fortunately, Jamaica is blessed by having a number of renewable energy and electricity policies that are supportive of renewable energy. For instance, we have a net billing arrangement, a tax reduction exemption, tax exemption on renewable energy sources, public grants, and we have at least established targets for renewable energy. The ministry is conducting energy efficiency programs. We have electric vehicles, tax reduction proposed on EV imports. We are a policy framework for EVs is in the development stage. Standards are in the development stage. We have, as we have indicated earlier, a national energy policy 2009. And as Liz had indicated, the Governor General in his throne speech had indicated that this plan energy policy will be revised. And will incorporate targets, higher targets for renewable energy. We have also completed the ministry integrated resource plan. An update is being undertaken. So I think we are in a good place in terms of supportive environment for renewable energy. All the policies seem to be falling together. So let us look at the benefits of achieving this renewable energy generation. We see wherein we can, if you look to the graph on the right, reduce fuel consumption by over 3.9 million barrels per annum. Current use about 5.96 million barrels. So that's a huge import avoided. In terms of emissions, 1.5 million tons of CO2 emissions is possible once the plan is implemented. And in fact, by 2030, our emission, which stands by our estimate at about 2,000 million metric tons per annum, can come down to below 1,500. In fact, by 2031, it would be just about 1,000. And that would satisfy some of our national determined contribution to climate change. In the next going forward, we have to understand that it's not smooth sailing in terms of renewable energy. Renewable energy comes with both advantages and limitations. Friendly, environmentally friendly, we saw where we could save significant amount of emission. Typically, renewable energy, solar plant, wind plants have very low operating costs relative to thermal plant, provide distributed systems. We have already identified good resource. So all in all, it reduces dependence on fossil fuel. The main advantage really has to do with the variability, and this tend to reduce grid stability, high capital costs, but I believe we are now in price parity with conventional and about to surpass it. Large land areas are required. However, there is a solution in terms of repowering existing sites with more modern, larger turbines, so we could get larger production from similar space. We speak about the production risk due to resource unpredictability. Conventional generating backup or energy storage system are required to maximize the benefits of renewable energy from the source. So having examined those issues, we have summarized our position in terms of achieving that renewable target of 50%. We have looked at the ability of the system to achieve this target in terms of a strength, weakness, opportunity, threat analysis, or if you will, in terms of our stepping stones and our stumbling block. We have already started fuel diversification. The existing generating, these are our strengths. The existing generating and transmission system has sufficient capacity to meet demand up to 2026. We have a supportive policy environment. We have an integrated resource plan, and the plan is being updated. As indicated below, we have very good renewable energy source, especially in terms of wind and solar. We have proven ability, and I'm sure our panelists, one of our panelists or both may speak to this. We have proven ability to attract energy-related investment. In fact, between 2016 and 2020, we have attracted $1.2 billion the industry for power project. It's a good investment risk in a stable economy. JPS has operated PPA, the sector, for more than 20 years, and we have not had any serious, if any, issues. We have strong institutional capabilities in terms of the regulatory, the ministries, the procurement agency. We have good pool of qualified technical. JPS has been operating renewable plants in addition to the IPP for more than 20 years. And in terms of weaknesses, we operate in an environment with high dependence on imported fuel. This weakness can be transformed to an opportunity, as it will provide a catalyst for more action in terms of removing some fossil fuel from the system. A persistent problem is an internal problem weakness, a high level of non-technical losses relative to our trading partner. While we have good resource, 12.4%, in our opinion, is relatively low. We have a relatively high electricity tariff compared to our trading partner, and there are some bottlenecks in the corporate here that the transmission plan will address. Several opportunities exist. The volatility of the petroleum supply prices is enough catalyst to spur the movement to renewable energy resource. Technologies exist to exploit our resources. We have a proposed requirement of all plants, oil-fired plants, next 4 to 5 years. This can create opportunity for space for replacing with RE plants. Since we have significant reduction of price for RE technologies, renewable energy technology. We have a catalyst of high dependence on imported fuel and low RE integration. This provides good catalyst for moving away from fossil fuel. Indicated there are further potential for renewable source. We have continued interest in energy investment in Jamaica, very much strong interest. New market segments are growing, are evolving in terms of self-generation. We have diversification opportunities in terms of repowering of existing expired wind and solar facility. Very high interest in RE due to climate change. Fuel savings from electricity. Electrification of the transport section is a reality. In fact, it opens the way for clean charging using renewable energy. There are a number of threats that we need to be cognizant of. The potential impact of hurricane, both unconventional, natural hazard, both unconventional and RE plants. We have high contribution of greenhouse gases to climate change in Jamaica. As indicated, 2022 our estimate is that 2,500 million metric tons of greenhouse gases are emitted. Greenhouse gases are the major contributor to climate change. That is beyond debate. We have IPP contracts that may become stranded assets if we continue to put in more renewable energy. Those have to be dealt with in a certain way. The fact that we have a proliferation of renewable energy solutions create grid defections by customers who can afford commercial, industrial, and some residential to move away. This may impact the tariff given our revenue cap tariff regime. We may want to look at as a threat some retired fossil plant, which may impede the pace of RE development depending on how we treat with it in terms of extension. And very importantly, we are feeling or seeing bottlenecks in the supply of equipment, RE equipment, due to logistics constraints, simply because of the heightened demand for RE equipment worldwide. And this has caused project delays if you have small demand. So are we ready for 50% RPS? Key takeaways. I think the sector is ready to achieve 50% renewable energy if we take full advantage of our strengths and opportunities and work on our weaknesses. But key factor, we need deliberate and swift focus action by the key stakeholders to execute identified projects. Projects have long lead time. So between now and 2030, we have to get a move on if we are going to implement these projects in a timely manner. It is also important that all stakeholders, especially GOG agency, MSET, GPE, OUR, work harmoniously towards realizing these targets so that we can reap the benefits associated. Benefits include avoided fuel costs. Renewable energy costs are not subject to price risk of energy market once installed. So we have pricing stability from that. And achieving the 50% target will allow the sector to comply with its mandate to assist Jamaica deliver on its international commitments, climate commitments. Next, please. Next slide.
Okay, that's the end of the slides.
Okay, thank you for your interest, and I trust that I've managed to shed some light on the integration of 50% renewable energy into the electricity system.
Thank you very much, Val. Very insightful information. And already we have some questions coming in, so I will pose them after the next two presenters. Val, you would have basically said, you know, it's a challenging target, but if all systems are in place, certainly it can be achieved. You talk about the fact that we'll have to heavily rely on battery energy storage systems. You identified, coming out of a SWOT analysis, some of the opportunities and threats and some of the weaknesses, because one of the areas for consideration is the security of the grid, which is very, very important. So I look forward to having you talk much more about this after the next two presenters. So I'll now invite the legal advisor for international clean energy projects based in the United States, Elizabeth Butler, to make her presentation on this. And if you're just joining us, thank you. You are watching the OUR's webinar on stepping stones and stumbling blocks to achieving a 2030 renewable energy target of 50%. We're discussing it from various angles. And you just heard from Val Fagan of the Office of Utilities Regulation. Elizabeth Butler is about to speak. And coming up after Elizabeth Butler will be Blaine Jarrett of the Jamaica Public Service Company Limited. And then you can have your questions, queries, comments, and addressed. And we invite you to post them in our Facebook and YouTube chat. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Liz. I've started screen sharing. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. My name is Elizabeth Butler. I am a practicing attorney. I work with both public sector and private sector clients on clean energy transition issues. It's been my great privilege to work closely with international donors and Government of Jamaica agencies over the past decade on clean energy transition issues. Val Fagan's wonderful presentation shows us that it is feasible for Jamaica to meet this tremendously ambitious 50% renewable mix target by 2030. He's also explained why it is so very important for Jamaica's economy, both macro economy and micro economy at consumer level, to make that transition to free Jamaica from the costs of fossil fuels and the volatile price shocks that come with it. My focus is on how to finance that transition. What I'd like to show you is a quick overview of the landscape in which Jamaica must finance these operations, that $1.2 billion price tag Val just mentioned to finance the projects to achieve the clean energy goal of 50%. Also take a look at some of the financing mechanisms at a high level that are available to achieve that. And finally, look at some of the special strengths and challenges that Jamaica faces in that process. Here's a snapshot, just big picture. Jamaica's $1.2 billion price tag is going to be a competitive effort. Jamaica must secure both public and private financing to meet that target. Right in the Caribbean region, there are all other Caribbean nations attempting to do the very same thing. And on the international level, you have other countries scrambling for financing as well. This is a chart created by CARICOM to show how Caribbean nations are achieving their nationally determined contributions under their international treaty, the so-called Paris Climate Treaty. Right in the middle there is Jamaica. And the blue target, the solid dark blue line, 40% is your nationally determined contribution. The light blue on the left is progress to date. The yellow line shows what CARICOM hopes you can achieve by 2027. You have much better information from Val's presentation about the granular nature of how you're going to close that gap. But the great news is that you have a plan to do it. Jamaica is outstanding in this regard and is to be commended for the tremendous base work done, putting those policies into place, aligning the laws and the regulatory framework. This is step one and absolutely critical to attract the private financing Jamaica seeks for these projects. The financing considerations that you face are that strong competition in the global marketplace, as I mentioned. Jamaica must deal with the fact that the landscape is changing. The huge demand for international donor financing limits Jamaica's access to what has been a reliable source in the past for early projects. The private sector requires the stable regulatory framework. It needs acceptable risk levels. That is the question they're going to ask. If we put our money in, are we going to get our money out with interest on time? And is this project going to be approved swiftly? The old reliance on public financing, that is government of Jamaica or other governmental entity financing, is just not feasible for price tags of $1.2 billion for Jamaica alone and others. So the ideal scenario is for Jamaica to leverage private sector investment through incentives and guarantees if needed. But the great news is that Jamaica's demonstrated success in prior project financing for renewable energy, solar and wind projects shows that Jamaica has a proven track record and that these projects are viable as the cost of the technology falls. This is a very high-level overview of the financing options. This is a chart created by ESMAP, World Bank, to help folks understand the different financial mechanisms that exist. We don't have time to go into detail, but understand that they fall into two major buckets. There's the public sector financing, which can be in the form of a grant, a loan, or some sort of concessionary financing, which would be some support from the international donor community to lower the cost of debt or de-risk a deal to make it more attractive to the private sector. There are full credit guarantees, there are partial credit guarantees. Those become very important. Another area that is emerging are dedicated renewable energy funds and energy efficiency funds where public donors try to aggregate financing from multiple private sector sources, creating a much faster track for project financing applications, approval, and completion. Also, in the energy efficiency side, the international donors have worked very hard to try to develop a robust private sector capacity to serve as energy services companies, to finance projects, and to help consumers drive and control their consumption of electricity to a lower level and lower their costs. Another area that treated in this part of the chart is really the forms of private equity investment. I won't give you the details, but like everything, it has many variations where private investors will extend a loan, invest in private equity, and have mechanisms to shift between the two to support viable private sector funded independent power projects. Final point I want to note is consumer financing. This is an area of growth for Jamaica. Many consumers can better control their consumption of electricity if they could put in energy efficiency projects or even distributed renewable energy behind their meter. I've worked recently over the past few years on an integrated utility service model, but there are other variations that say, here's how we can extend financing to those consumers to make immediate investments to lower their electricity costs. It also has the benefit for the system of lowering the demand and the peak demand, thereby delaying and deferring the need for new renewable power investments. This is a viable project. There are multiple pilot projects on this topic, and hopefully Jamaica can explore those soon. Let's go to the strengths. Jamaica's strength in renewable energy and energy financing. We talked about that proven track record. It is terrific and it matters. So take some real heart from that, because I think that it demonstrates that you can cut through that 1.2 billion in a staged and sequenced approach. The great strength Jamaica offers is a very clear pathway for project review, licensing, and financing. A developer will want to know, is that IR integrated resource and resilience plan in place? As Val has mentioned, you've done that and you have a very strong plan. You have the Generation Procurement Authority ready to mobilize those plans to drive the key sector actors together on spec and on time to get those projects out to market and bid on and awarded. You have very important experience in power purchase agreements, how to configure them to attract private investment. This is very important, and Jamaica has great insights because of your history and experience. Importantly, Jamaica brings a broad technical and financial expertise in her current business marketplace, her current technical advisors to the government. This is a great advantage. You also have a strong global network of finance partners who can be tapped to assist with this. So you have a strong regulatory framework, and that is going to distinguish you as a leader in that competition for private financing. And you also have a very strong and positive experience and history with international donors and development banks. The future challenges for Jamaica are really right on the shoulders of all the key stakeholders, but especially on the shoulders of the OUR as the economic regulator. How do you keep the electricity supply reliable, affordable, and sustainable during the transition, as Val pointed out in his presentation? It is a huge juggling act. It's got finance considerations, it's got technical considerations, it has long-term and short-term implications. What Val talked about in the way of assuring alignment and participation of all the key sector stakeholders is essential. The utility is a very, very important player. All of the players need to decide how best to communicate the advantages of pursuing this 50% target on the 2030 timeframe. How does it strengthen Jamaica's macroeconomy? How does it provide benefits to consumers? Emergent technologies are a challenge. Everyone must be aware that the pace of change may render it possible for well-heeled private businesses and consumers to become virtual self-generators with storage as it becomes more affordable. OUR has a great challenge, along with JPS, to assure that grid users, anybody who wants to remain connected to the grid, has to pay their fair share, even as they save on their own electric bills. Final major challenge point is how best to finance consumer renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. That integrated utility service model is a good one, where a consumer applies, pays a certain amount down, but gets financing over the life of the project. The consumer repays that financing through the electric bill on a monthly basis. Usually the bill ends up equal or less than pre-project levels. There is also opportunity for Jamaica to make inroads right now through both regulated and unregulated financing for those consumer projects, through concessionary fundings with banks, or through even a regulated fund that could be used to finance those projects. So I thank you for your attention and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Elizabeth Butler. Certainly, you've given some food for thought. You've spoken about financing and some challenges that the OUR, as the economic regulator, has to consider: reliability, affordability, sustainability, ensuring that the grid users pay their fair share. Certainly, those are definite considerations. And we do have the questions coming in, and we have been posting them in the chat. So we're going to take our last presenter before we get to them. So I now invite Blaine Jarrett, Senior Vice President for Energy Solutions at the Jamaica Public Service Company Limited, to make his presentation. Blaine, welcome. Over to you.
Thanks, Liz. Good morning, everyone. Just allow me to share quickly. Right, so I have listened to Val, I have listened to Elizabeth, and I believe that they have given us a good sector perspective of what is required to ensure that we attain or 50% penetration of renewables by 2030. My presentation will take it from a little different angle. I will look at it from the context of JPSCO and how JPSCO is supporting, or what the challenges are in relation to us ensuring that we can meet that 50% renewable mix target by 2030. So what I'll do, I will take it from the context of the procurement of new and the replacement of existing generation. I'll also look at what are the stumbling blocks or the challenges with regards to onboarding renewable generation onto the grid. And we'll also look at some of the challenges that we do see as it relates to interconnecting these renewable resources onto the grid. So I'll first start by looking at what is the right of JPSCO, or how the structure has been allowed to facilitate JPSCO onboarding new or replacement generation. Val went into the overall structure of the sector, but I'll focus specifically on JPS. So my first slide here, you will see where I'm sharing extract from the Electric Act 2015, particularly condition 20, where it establishes the framework where the generation procurement entity, shortened for GPE, is appointed by cabinet, and one of their sole purpose is for procuring new generating capacity for the country. They are mandated to be responsible for managing and administer the procurement process, and they are required to do it via a competitive bidding process. And that is towards selling that supply of electricity to the cheapest grid. Key point that the Electric Act mandates that JPSCO is not allowed to replace its existing generating capacity other than in accordance with the right of first refusal granted by the said Act. And it should be subject to protocols and rules established by the generating procurement entity. And the terms has to be set out as outlined in the third schedule of the Act. I'll speak a little more to that on another slide. And should also JPSCO fails to meet the requirements of that said third schedule, then the replacement capacity may be procured by a competitive process, also managed by the GPE, or any other process determined by cabinet in the event of national interest. So the Act clearly outlined a very prescriptive process that must be followed to facilitate the procurement of new generating capacity and the replacement of existing generating capacity. Followed by the Act, the Electricity License 2016, and there are a couple of conditions here. Conditions 2, subsection 4A, condition 6, subsection 5, made specific provisions for the replacement and the procurement of new generation. Condition 2 of the license also give JPSCO the right, together with others, to compete for the right to develop new generating capacity to satisfy the demand of the country. Condition 6.5, JPSCO also have the right to replace its own generation sets under ROFA as defined in the Electricity Act. So coming from the Act, the license literally is aligned with the provisions that have been provided by the Act. Also of note, which I want to share, is that there are other obligations that is embedded and enshrined in the license that grants JPSCO an higher burden of responsibility. JPSCO is obligated as a vertical integrated utility to provide an adequate, safe, and efficient service based on modern standards to all parts of Jamaica at reasonable rates. And this is to facilitate economic growth and sustenance of the country. And there's no other entity that have that overarching responsibility that is now imposed on JPSCO by virtue of the license. JPSCO is also responsible as a generator of last resort to the system. What that is, the network that is managed by JPSCO is required to serve the entire country in relation to the production and delivery of electricity. Should there be a failure in any of the IPPs or even in the JPSCO system, the only entity that is held accountable to ensure that the system delivers the available energy to its customers is JPSCO. There are others who are required to meet certain contractual obligations of their PPAs, but the overarching responsibility lies with JPSCO to ensure a system is capable and is available to deliver supply to its customers. I would want to spend a little more on ROFA for two reasons. One, there is the view in the industry that the right of first refusal is somewhat an impediment to competition, is somewhat an impediment to the nation achieving its 50% renewables. So I have two slides. This slide I'll focus on some additional features of the ROFA, and my next slide I will do a check against whether or not it is impeding competition within the industry. First, I just want to underscore the fact that the ministry, that is MSET, has the responsibility to decide the schedule for the replacement of existing generating sets. So that's a very important point to note. The replacement capacity is capped at the existing capacity for the replacement unit or equivalent, depending on the mix of type of generation. The GPE, which is the generating procurement entity, must approve the terms and conditions of any new replacement. The price for the replacement capacity must meet the target, and this target is a target that has been established via the IRP process, which is what we call the avoided cost. If that avoided cost is not met or better, then JPSCO will not be able to procure or to replace its existing generating assets under ROFA. Also, it should be noted that JPSCO can and will lose if it's not able to exercise or cannot achieve the set price, meaning that there's a very prescriptive position where that is concerned. Once you can't meet it, then it goes to competitive tender. In the exercise of ROFA, JPS has very little control, and we cannot decide unilaterally on how much capacity to replace, when, and at what cost. The process is triggered by the government of Jamaica with scrutiny and approval from the generation procurement entity. So those are the features of the ROFO that is designed for transparency, to preserve competition, and to ensure that the market is competitive. But let's look further in terms of the right of first refusal and the competition in the sector. So one of the reasons why the ROFO was established, as I explained earlier before, in terms of JPs have an additional obligation in terms of the generation of last resort and the responsibility to serve all customers. It is intended to ensure that there's timely replacement of a specific pool of existing generation, that assets that are due for retirement. What we have seen in the industry over the last maybe decade or so, that there has been a lot of procrastination in terms of generation additions or replacement. And that in itself is a risk to the sector. The ROFO seeks to address that risk by being prescriptive in replacement of existing generation. The addition of new capacity to meet expansion needs is by way of competitive means. Again, Val spoke earlier to the IRP process. He spoke in terms of what the IRP is looking like, and the ROFO cannot be applied for the addition of new generation that comes out of that particular process. I would also quickly want to mention that JP's ROFO has not prevented competition in the past, and we have seen no evidence that it will in the future prevent competition. In fact, since its establishment, there have been 4 IPP established since ROFO. We all know of them: the Wicktons, the BMR, the 8 Rivers, and the Content Solar in Clarendon. In addition, on the behind the meter scene, we have seen dozens of energy service companies now operating in Jamaica, providing energy solutions. We have seen almost an explosion of the award of licenses in the net billing program. So we're pretty much confident that it's an active sector. Competition is live and well, and we strongly support that it be a very competitive sector in that regard. And in closing out on that slide, I just want to underscore the point that the ROFO does not interfere with competitive process for new capacity as determined through the IRP. All right. So very important that we take note of that. Now, there are some challenges in adding renewables to the grid, and thanks, Elizabeth, I recognize that you underscore a few of those. Now, we believe that renewable is indispensable to the energy security goals of the country. And for that extent, we are of the firm view that any future generation must include renewable energy. We have seen as well, and Val did make mention of it, where there's a rapid reduction in technology cost that presents a significant opportunity for renewables to contribute to lowering electricity prices, even fuel diversification, and to contribute to Jamaica's environmental commitment to reduce greenhouse gases. JPSCO is committed to the right balance of renewable energy mix in the sector, and I will explain a little further. We believe that balance is required in the size, the timing, whether or not whatever resource that we're going to be using, to ensure that we have a cleaner and safe environment with respect to energy production and energy use. The island grid requires balance in intermittent renewables, batteries, and thermal to ensure that the grid is not at risk. Let me expand on that a little bit. So renewables are available as firm renewables. For example, the hydros, renewables can be supported by batteries as well, indicated what the IRP is seeing. But we believe that thermal should also be a factor for grid stability. Why is that so? There are critical stability requirements for the grid that the combination of batteries and renewables will not provide. Yes, batteries we can store, batteries have very fast response timelines. The inverters that are now being used with batteries give some synthetic inertia, but the grid, particularly for an island state, which is not interconnected, require inertia that can only be provided by thermal plants. And in any study, in any assessment, the requirement for thermal plants need to be fully explored, not in terms of just serving the load, but in terms of the resiliency and the protection of the grid. The contingencies that occur normal in the grid will provide evidence of this need. Consideration must be given to ensure customers do not pay more for the new renewables, in addition to storage, in addition to pay for stranded gas contracts that may have been established prior to us bringing on these new renewables. For example, if we don't ensure that the take or no pay provisions of those gas contracts are not fully ventilated or renegotiated and or modeled in our assessment, what will happen is that customers will eventually pay more, even though there has been a significant reduction in renewables and batteries. Customers will eventually pay more for the cost of electricity. And this is a very important, delicate balance that is going to be required, that needs to be done by modeling. And the point I have next here is to indicate that a lot of models are done using aged, static generation data, and our modeling systems sometimes have deficiencies in identifying some of the grid exposure. What is more practical, what is more realistic, what is more futuristic is to look at the real-time data, model utilizing real-time data, instead of looking at synthetic data while doing our IRP modeling. That is required to ensure that the appropriate balance of renewables supported by storage is embedded in our plans to ensure that we don't leave the grid at risk. In summary, too much renewable capacity roll in too fast could inflate system prices and tariffs and deteriorate the quality and reliability and security of the grid. So that's an important point I wanted to raise. One other aspect that we wanted to look at was the grid interconnection. There are some must-dos, there are some concerns, and I just want to highlight a few of these. So most often, persons who are developing grid renewable intertied systems do not, one, fully understand what is required, or do not fully take the time to carry out the requisite studies to ensure that the system is appropriately modeled and is appropriately catered for. One such study that must be done prior to the submission of any bid is what we call a feasibility study. That study will look at load flow, short circuit, contingency analysis to determine the feasibility to interconnect that particular or proposed renewable systems at a particular node in the grid. Very important in that regard, because what we're also seeing is that persons are not factoring that where they are citing these renewable systems may have a significant variation in the impact on the grid. Following the bid process, and once there's a selection and a contract is awarded, there's another step, there's another level of assessment that needs to be done. And this is one of the steps that is also done at a very high level during the IRP process. But before you get to bringing on these units, even after the IRP, the specific grid impact study needs to be done. The grid impact study is more looking at the resilience of the grid, more looking at the security of the grid, and what is required here is stability and critical fault clearance analysis, low and high voltage right through capabilities are consistent with the grid code. These are fundamentals that are required to ensure the grid can serve its purpose. Yes, we may have adequate generation. Yes, we may have even more than what is required generation. But if they are not integrated onto the grid in a way where they can still support the technical and the commercial requirements of the network, then they would pose a problem. Some of the concerns that we are seeing is that there's a very high percentage of generations are being sited in greenfield or in remote locations. And a lot of these are concentrated within the central node of the grid between St. Elizabeth, Manchester, Clarendon. That element of the grid becoming congested and would require significant upgrade and expansion to facilitate integration of more renewables. Unlike renewable energy resources, where the technology itself is rapidly driving down, we're seeing an opposite trend with other infrastructure costs in the T&D network. Accelerated in recent times by COVID and the Ukraine-Russia war, but this is a concern that we're noting. It is actually going in the wrong direction. Supply chain issues as well, where the costs to integrate these renewables, despite the fact that the renewables themselves are very cost effective, the interconnection is putting upward pressure on tariffs. And this is something that we need to look at. And these are the areas where we believe that once we have a coordination and proper dialogue, proper assessment with all the stakeholders, the regulator, MSET, private sector, JPS, we will be able to attain that 50% target by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lane Jarrett of JPS. So we heard JPS saying, yes, we are in support of renewables, but not so fast. We have a lot of things to consider. There are some must-dos, including a feasibility study, a grid impact study. We under our various pieces of legislation under which we operate, we have to look at what are some of the guiding factors. We have the right of first refusal. And so we are also mindful, says the JPS, that the safe delivery of your electricity supply the onus is solely on us. We are accountable and responsible for that, and we have to take certain things into consideration. We're going to take your questions now. If you're joining us live on Facebook and YouTube, please post your questions in the chat. We have quite a few coming in already, but I'll pose my first question to Val, because Blaine made a very interesting point regarding the need for thermal to be part of the energy mix. He says we need inertia, Val. We can't just look at solar and wind. We have to put thermal in the mix. What's your view on that?
Well, thank you, Liz. We are not advocating, and I hope that Blaine is not suggesting that no thermal. Currently, we have thermal plants on the system. We have the 192 megawatt thermal plant. We have the Bogue plant, 120, plus we have the Jamaica. So it's not to say that we are advocating, I'm not sure that the removal of all thermal plants, because as you know, thermal plants provide the mechanical, the rotating mass, mechanical inertia. Notwithstanding the RE sources, etc., batteries. Batteries can provide, not to exactly replace, fast response because well, not to get too technical, the inertia, the thermal plant is act as a damper, giving the system time to recover to its what we call in the business steady state in the steady state. The fact that energy storage, has rapid response time will tend to mitigate the issue of not having as much mechanical inertia. We do not envisage, and we are not saying, well, I am not saying that we don't need thermal plant. If you understand, one of the solutions is to, and Blaine made the point about rushing into, I'm not sure, that is interpreted into renewable energy, because some of the options we have, and we will be, I think the ministry will be addressing these in terms of the retirement schedule, the minister retirement schedule, is to, one, you could retain some of the peaking plants. While they are expensive to operate, you don't need to operate them often. You operate them in under certain contingency situation. So, and they are very cheap to own. So that could also provide time in terms of implementing renewable energy. You don't have to retire all and you perhaps shouldn't, your gas turbine, your other thermal plant at the same time, because what we are seeing here is also the evolution of the batteries technology, when over time they will eventually replace the gas turbines. But we can get breathing space to stay abreast of the technology, ensure that the technology is mature enough before we implement them on a wide-scale basis.
Let me get Blaine's take on that. Blaine, do you have any comment on that?
Right. So I'm aligned with Val in terms of the use of the technology. Batteries, as Val clearly outlined, are becoming cheaper. They are becoming better in terms of their performance. We are now seeing where 4 to 5 hour batteries are becoming the norm. So that provides a significant improvement in what is available out there. There are, however, some fundamentals that sometimes persons miss. So inertia for the grid is not just the response to system disturbance, which is one of the things that most persons look at. Batteries can literally replace that in response to the time that they operate, and they allow the protection systems to work. So there's no technical deficiency there. What is the problem is in your base load, you want to have some of those to ensure that the system can operate in steady state, not under faulted condition. And that is one of the things that a lot of engineers miss. And Val, we can talk offline on that a little more. But I think we're aligned, but that there are some little technical details there that needs to be factored in the decision. We are strongly of the view that as the battery technology improves, we will be able to embed a lot more renewables. We are also of the view that Jamaica, being an island state, should not be the guinea pigs for the onboarding of some of this technology, with the risk that comes with the protection of the grid.
Okay, so we have quite a few questions. We're going to get through them as quickly as possible. Can someone speak about the impact on customer bills with rise in renewable? Since the cost of construction is higher than fossil plants, so the argument is that customers will pay for capital outlay. Blaine, do you want to take that one?
Well, I can share it with Val as well. So Val went to length in his presentation to indicate that what we're seeing now is that renewables are becoming a lot cheaper
Mhm.
in terms of a capital outlay than fossil plants. A matter of fact, since the Ukraine-Russian war, we have seen a trajectory downward trend in the cost for renewables. So that impact or exposure to rates, for me, I believe fossil fuel provides a greater risk. However, the biggest risk for us here, as I said earlier, is on the technical side, and also that you don't want to leave some of your existing fossil plants stranded, where the customers are going to be required to pay both for the stranded assets,
Yeah.
and also pay for the storage that is required to support the batteries, and also pay for the cost for the interconnection, which a lot of times is not factored in the cost of the generation, and also pay, right, for the renewables themselves. So when you aggregate all of that, that's
Yeah.
what you need to look at as the impact on our customers.
Val, you want to weigh in on that one?
Yes.
And I don't know if
Let
Elizabeth
me
has a view on that as well.
let's start at the top, just to say, and I will get, well, if time permits, into some of the details. Our analysis, given and plain and indicated that, and we understand that based on our research analysis, the prices of renewable prices have been falling rapidly. In fact, for the last 10 years, battery costs have gone down by about 80% or so. So as the solar plant. So there is price parity or more economic price than conventional plants. So the price is not really the issue. But as Blaine mentioned, the auxiliary services, let me say, in addition to the equipment itself, speaking of the stability of the system. However, because batteries can provide you or energy storage two-way, can act as a generator to fill gap, or it can act as a storage medium to prevent dump energy from renewable sources. So it acts both ways. The fact is that stranded assets can be minimized, and how to do this. And we recognize the impact of stranded asset. Very little generation, but you are paying the capital cost. But I think we are in a situation that there are a number of projects that in the next couple of years will come up for our number of contracts, I would say.
Yes.
For renewal. So we need to give very good consideration as to how we approach that issue of renewing contracts. I am not making any pronouncement on how you treat with these, but just to say that we need to give serious consideration of whether these will become a burden to the system, a stranded asset, or can we deal with it in a certain way that we create more generating space to accommodate more renewables at a lower cost?
Yes.
Or should we maintain some of the JPS owned plants, given that their fixed O&M and other costs are much way below some of the plants that are to be expired? So these are factors that need
We have to consider. Thanks for that, Val.
consideration. And just to say and to complete,
yes,
in terms of an overview, because procurements of renewable, and as we understand and know that it's a competitive process, and the GPA has the mandate to procure competitive generation. But just to say, based on our analysis so far, we are seeing using market prices, but as I said, competition will determine. We have seen a 13% reduction in generating cost over in 2030 if we achieve this milestone, 13%. So that's where we are at. And as I said, it could be around that, but we have a competitive process. We have used international benchmark standards.
Yeah, thank you, Val. Elizabeth, do you want to weigh in on this before we get to a few more questions quickly?
Very quickly, I agree with both Blaine and Val. This is a question of timing and opportunity. Like any good business person, the Jamaica electricity sector is going to review the opportunities to end old contracts or replace old assets with new assets. That's the first near-term opportunity. And we'll seize the opportunity to convert to renewable energy. The premise of the prior question was that the initial capital cost would be higher. They've explained it isn't. It's price parity and lowering. But the second important point to emphasize is that over the life of the project, there is tremendous savings in the fuel costs that makes the renewable option more economic. And that's what you have financing to do, is to smooth those costs, assure that the project can be built and be paid for through rates over the life of the project. But I emphasize for everyone, Blaine's point, if Jamaica is doing this very skillfully and honoring legal contracts, you don't want to get into a position where you are double loading or short cutting contract corners. That is not the Jamaica way. That's not what has been done in the past. And that is what makes Jamaica a safe environment for within the Caribbean for private finance. So those key points.
Thanks for that, Elizabeth. I'm going to throw this one to you, Elizabeth, because I think it goes to the heart of part of your presentation regarding financing. So here's a viewer who's saying, as a representative of a private company anxious to invest in RE in Jamaica, I don't think financing is a major hurdle for RE in Jamaica. The hurdle is establishing a route to facilitate private finance. How do you respond to that, Elizabeth? Do you think that's
they're closely tied. They are closely tied. I do believe that there is a great deal of interest. And in fact, over 5 years ago, when I was in Jamaica, I was visited regularly by private venture funds looking for an opportunity. What they found, though, is they got into the details on any particular project, is that the time to market, the time to permitting was not attractive, and that they wanted a much smoother and quicker path for that process to occur. Jamaica is well positioned to enable that factor to move forward smoothly with the Generation Procurement Authority, the competition, the Generation Procurement Authority, and prompt licensing of the projects, so that the financing can close in time and the developer doesn't lose the opportunity for financing as they go look for nearer term opportunities elsewhere.
Thank you. 3 minutes left before we wrap up. I have a question for you, Blaine. A viewer wants to know, how will the right of first refusal impact on the RE penetration?
How will the right of first refusal impact on the
RE penetration in Jamaica?
Yeah, well, the question is not quite clear what is meant by that.
Yes.
So I would ask
the restrictions and the right of first refusal by JPS, if I'm trying to interpret this correctly, but I agree that, you know, they're saying whether it will have a negative impact in keeping with the legislative provisions that JPS has provided.
I don't think so. I think the process is well established. The IRP process will dictate how things go. And I think the legislative framework just needs to move a little faster.
Yeah.
I don't think it will have an impact at all.
Yeah.
But I know you have 3 minutes, but before you go, there's a point that Elizabeth made just now that I want to underscore in terms of violation of contract and so forth. We have to ensure that the fabric of the sector is protected. If there is no provision within the sector to protect the sector from financing, protect the sector from honoring contracts, honoring the PPAs, honoring the gas service agreements, then the sector will become fragile. The sector will not sustain itself. And I think that's an important facet that needs to be looked at during all of this.
Thank you, Blaine. And my question to all of you, I want all of you to answer this question for me in keeping with the theme of today's webinar, stumbling blocks and stepping stones to achieving the 50% renewable target by 2030. From where you sit, do you see that we have more stepping stones or more stumbling blocks for us to achieve the 2030 target? I'm putting all of you on the spot. Elizabeth, you want to take that first?
I believe in stepping stones, especially with the extraordinary talent in Jamaica. You will make it work. You have made it work to date. Jamaica stands out among the Caribbean alone in having resolved the licensing issue with the legacy utility. That is a hurdle others have not. They've stumbled. So all credit to Jamaica, and you have the regulatory framework, and you have many private financing options available. I believe it will be done, and it will be done in a careful, controlled, and cooperative fashion.
Blaine, thank you. Elizabeth.
So like Elizabeth, I am more thinking there are more stepping stones. I believe that the process and systems are well established, but I believe there is some lack of agility. I believe that the agencies, the government, and the various stakeholders need to be a lot more decisive in their actions and act quickly.
And Val, we started with you, ending with you, sort of.
Thank you. I tend to agree with both panelists. The President Blaine mentioned about the fragility of the let me say, the sector in terms of not honoring, I hope I'm interpreting your contractual arrangement. When we speak of plants whose contract may not be renewed because they are not the best for the system to keep them up. We certainly honor contracts. There are provisions in each of the IPP contract which says that the contract can be extended under certain conditions. It can also be terminated or not even terminated the time it has expired, and there is no must renew. Right? So that is not about not honoring the contract. No. It's about applying the provisions to suit the situation for economic advantage of the sector. So I have no consideration or concern about the fragility of the sector in terms of that, because we have been operating PPAs for 20 years, and I cannot, I've been in the industry for nearly 40 years or more, and I have not seen wherein we have violated, failed to honor any terms of a PPA contract. And we have been entering into PPA contracts since 1994. So we stick to the term, and if the term says extension based on certain things or expiration, we honor those conditions.
Mm-hmm. So stepping stones, Val, you're seeing more stepping stones than stumbling blocks.
Yes, we have more stepping stones than stumbling blocks, and as Blaine indicated, that we need, and as I had indicated, swift action. One of the issues we have, and I think Liz mentioned this in terms of the timelines, the period for which we approve. In fact, the GPE, I believe now, may taking steps to improve. Previously, the award of a contract takes 15 months just from issuing of RFP to the award of the contract, which is way too long, given the timeline that we are working with.
Yes.
This needs to be cut into, and I think the GPs may taking steps to reduce this timeline significantly. If that is done and quick action is taken to seek the requisite projects on the competitive basis in a very transparent way, I think we can make it, but it needs quick action, swift action, and decisive action from all parties.
Thank you. Thank you, Val. So you talk about timelines. I heard JPS earlier talking about timing which can prove just as detrimental, but coming from two different angles, but nonetheless, very, very important issues. I want to thank you, panelists, for being a part of this very, very important engagement today. I know the dialogue will continue as we all work collectively in tandem with the government of Jamaica and the respective ministry to achieve this new expanded target of 50% of renewable energy by 2030. Thank you so much, Valentine Fagan, Power Generation Systems Consultant at the Office of Utilities Regulation in Jamaica. Elizabeth Butler is the legal advisor for International Clean Energy Project based in the US now, but at some point in time, she was a part of USAID in Jamaica. We miss you, Elizabeth. And Blaine Jarrett, Senior Vice President for Energy Delivery at the Jamaica Public Service Company Limited. Thank you so very much for being part of this discussion. We want to thank you, the viewers, for being part of this as well. We also want to thank the producer, Gordon Brown, and his support team, Mark Kirkland, Jody and Lawrence. We want to thank Mian Quinlan, who was the interpreter today. Excellent, Mian. Thank you so much for your assistance. And of course, technical support for today's webinar was provided by Visual Tech. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I am Elizabeth Bennett Marsh. You can always watch this webinar and share the link with other persons. It will be available on the OUR's YouTube platform. Thank you and all the best. Take care. Bye-bye.